Hi, everybody. I am here today with Michael Duggan, Dr. Michael Duggan, who's a counselor and advisor at the College of DuPage. Michael's written a book called First Class Support for College Students on the Autism Spectrum. He has been at COD since 2003, and since that time, he started the Coach Program and Autism America. And maybe after I introduce Michael, you can talk a little bit more about those, and we'll launch into a different discussion. I'm also with Adam oh my gosh, I practiced your name, Adam. It's Wasilewski. Do you want to correct me?
No, that's fine. You're right.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I practiced, I swear. And Adam has his master's degree in American Sign Language Education from Gallaudet, and he is the chair of our American Sign Language interpreting program, correct? Also, Adam started and developed this department. He's a single person department, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct? Good.
Yeah.
I thought I would start out. I'm Julie DiLiberti, by the way. I teach humanities at COD, and I'm the global education liaison. And I thought I would start. Today we're here to talk about COVID and the deaf community and people with disabilities. And I'm going to let Michael and Adam talk, to each other about that and to me. I do want to start out with just giving us a couple sets of statistics, and from there launch the ways that numbers of people are being impacted by COVID. So the World Economic Forum says that there are 1.3 billion people with disabilities worldwide. And the New York Times says that there are 466 million people with disabling hearing loss worldwide. And then there's an article that there's a story that NPR posted that said people with developmental disabilities are 4 times more likely to contract COVID and 2 times as likely to die from it. And I think those are rather sobering statistics, all of them. And so that gets into all kinds of issues about help and resources and access to resources and technology and just the social interactions as well. So I would like Michael and Adam to go ahead and start talking about those kinds of things. And I think, Michael, if you don't mind, we'll start with Adam, because I know the big question on everybody's mind is, how does a mask affect the deaf community?
Yes, prior to COVID, we still were experiencing communication issues that was going on. And then COVID hit, and now it's requiring you to wear a mask everywhere, and communication is still an issue. Again, it depends on which situation that we're talking about. So, for instance, if I go to the grocery store, and they're all wearing masks, and maybe if they're talking, I don't know if somebody's talking to me, or if I have a question,
right,
and I can't understand their response, so that's really hard because you can't see their lips. If you're talking, now if we're talking about hospitals, all of the doctors and nurses are wearing masks, and they have them.
Right.
And they usually provide an interpreter. So they do have communication access. It really depends on which situation that we're talking about. But yes, the masks have a huge impact on the deaf community. Also, I want to add about the hospital environment. A lot of interpreters are not sure if they should go interpret at the hospital or not. They don't want to put themselves at risk of contracting the COVID-19. So a lot of deaf people's access has been reduced as well. However, there is one solution. They have been using VRI, which is video remote interpreting.
Oh, okay, okay, okay. So off-site.
But they use a screen, and the interpreter would be interpreting from home or from a remote area or some center. But it's not always 100% accessible. Sometimes the internet has problems, or sometimes they can't hear enough, or
Okay.
they're missing information.
So
my point with all of this is, with this whole COVID-19 virus, is that it has changed everything, from masks to interpreter access, socializing, everything.
So Adam, I saw somewhere that they were talking about maybe making a mesh. I don't think it would help, but a mesh material with masks so that the masks and lips could be sort of visible. Any thoughts on that? And I'm going to throw on, and then we'll move over to Michael in just a second. But I have this image, and I know it's the times that we're in right now. But I'm thinking about, what if you're a person of color in a grocery store or in a hospital getting agitated because you can't communicate? And I just worry about what's happening to our people of color in today's climate as well. If you either have a disability or you are deaf, I mean, how does that also impact the heightened anxiety? So, Michael, you'll probably talk about that. But Adam, in terms of these masks that it might be clear, is that a potential solution, or is that mythology?
Yes and no. Before there were masks, before there was this COVID-19, we were struggling with communication. Some deaf people preferred to read lips. Some deaf people do not. Now, when you're adding a mask into it, having a clear panel, that might help. I mean, definitely. And some interpreters do have those masks that have that clear.
They do, okay.
So that's nice. So that does advocate for deaf community, so that you can see the mouth through that clear panel. But I want to also add that it's not only about reading lips, it's also the body language. It's important to know who's talking, what's going on.
Right, okay.
I mean, if it's completely covered, you miss a lot. So you're blocking half the face when you're wearing a mask.
Right, I was at a gathering.
It can cause anxiety and stress as well.
I was at a gathering, we were at a student rally protest, and my colleagues were all there with the masks, and I recognized no one. I confused, yeah, so even, right, I understand that I don't even have that overlay of being deaf. Michael, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that have come up for people with disabilities as we've moved into COVID?
Sure. So I think there are two populations in particular I work with that I think are really impacted, and those are students with developmental disabilities, or intellectual disabilities is a more informal term, and students in the autism spectrum. For students with developmental disabilities, we know that the infection rate is higher. I believe there was a study, paper came out 4 times more likely an infection rate for people with a developmental disability. And there's a variety of reasons for that. Some people with developmental disabilities already have existing secondary conditions, so that makes them more vulnerable. Some of them live in group housing situations, so the infection rate is more easy to spread. I have students who are working a lot of hours because they want to do something to contribute, which is fantastic, but that, by them working, it makes them more vulnerable. So all those elements are things that are concerned to those students. And so that's something that we want to keep an eye on. Also, for students on the autism spectrum, we know 1 in 54 students have, or 1 in 54 people, according to the Centers for Disease Control, have some type of autism spectrum disorder. That's a pretty big size in and of itself. We also know, looking at the research, about half of that population, of that 1 in 54, also struggles with anxiety. And so this is obviously a very anxiety-producing time. There's a lot of unexpected changes in our environments. We're doing a lot of things we never anticipated we'd be doing 6 months ago. So a lot of the students that I talk to are struggling with that. Add on top of that, they're stuck at home. They may be feeling isolated and alone. So I end up doing a lot of wellness check kind of phone calls with my students, just talking for 5 to 10 minutes once a week, just to make sure they're okay, just so they know that there's someone out there that cares about them. And I think that's really important. We want to support our students best as they can, and know that we care about them and we want to stay connected to them during this difficult time.
So I have two ways that I want to sort of continue the conversation. And one of them is sort of talking again about the limited resources, and the caregivers of people living in group homes and are often women, and often long hours, and often paid, and often the caregivers at home. So that again limits access. And then of course, if we're talking about people using their cell phones to type things, once again, we're getting into these ideas of access to information. So is accessibility to, Adam already talked about resources, but is accessibility to technology, is accessibility to caregivers becoming a greater issue or a greater problem?
It really depends. It depends on the person, the patient, and the deaf person. It depends. Some people rely heavily on technology for communication. Some people prefer to read lips. Some people prefer an interpreter. So it's every aspect is impacted. I mean, compared to 6 months ago, communication still had issues. But now with the coronavirus, there's even more issues.
Before we started recording, we were talking, and Michael, you had mentioned that very sort of off the cuff. I don't think you meant it off. I don't think that, but you just said, anxiety is a real thing and people don't think it is a real thing. And I sort of feel like you're both talking about an added layer of anxiety. Can either of you or both of you address that thing that's a real thing that people are just like, yeah, we're all anxious, but can you give us more insight into what that anxiety is like?
I think it's a real condition that we tend to undervalue. We assume that, oh, well, it's not that big a deal, or it's not, you just calm down. So like the worst thing you can say to someone who's anxious is just calm down. But that's what we do. It's a real issue, and it affects our physiology. It affects the way we look at things. And it affects the way that we can troubleshoot, which I think is really how it impacts. When we're feeling anxious, we don't always solve our problems the best that we can. We make bad decisions, and those bad decisions now can lead to life-threatening conditions. We forget to wear a mask, we forget to wash our hands. So now all of a sudden, this anxiety not only is impactful to us on an individual level, but it really can develop a threat to our physiological health as well. So it's something we need to be talking about, and access to mental health resources is so important. I'm really happy that at COD, our counseling center is open, still seeing students. I'm really happy that community resources are available for people to access. But then again, that ties to technology, right? You have to be able to have a phone. You got to be able to have a laptop. To be able to access those things. And if you don't, now you're cut off, you're limited. So it can become a classist thing where only those with the most resources can access the supports they need.
Yeah, I also want to add about anxiety or depression. Before coronavirus, there was a lot of deaf people that maybe felt isolation from their family. Some families, don't sign, so they don't have that communication. And then coronavirus, when that happened, they've become more isolated from work or friends. So anxiety or depression, you see it happening all over the place. We really need resources and access available to everyone.
Okay. I'm going to, again, I keep saying I have two more things. I just keep adding things. There are two more things I want to talk to you about. The World Economic Forum posted an article, and I found it interesting because they were sort of looking at, they had two, I don't know if I call them silver linings or not. I just think they're two interesting points, and I want to get your reactions to both of them. And the first point was, hey, welcome to the world of people with disabilities and to people who are deaf. Because COVID is making, the problem is it's exaggerating the conditions for people with disabilities and who are deaf. But what the article was saying is now other people have to know what isolation feels like. So I guess I'd like a more nuanced response to that. And then the other thing they said was one of the things that will come out of this is that workplaces have had to adapt for people who don't have disabilities and who are not deaf. So we now know that workplaces can adapt for people who do have disabilities and haven't necessarily been willing to do that prior to that. So I guess I'd like to get your reactions to both of those thoughts. The first one being, hey, is it really welcome to the world of disabilities and deafness, or is it not? And two, what do you think will happen to workplaces as we move forward?
I can go first. I think this experience does give people a sense, more than ever, of feeling isolated, feeling helpless at times to be able to address things. And those often are situations that people with disabilities can experience. From an accessibility standpoint, resources are limited. Suddenly, some of the ways you troubleshoot things, you can't. Resources you access, you can't. So those frustrations are all real. You know, for a lot of social services for people with disabilities, the wait lists are years for things like housing. Now, for people without disabilities, they're having to wait not as long as that, but they're knowing what that's like, having to wait a long time to get supports. I think the workplace is changing too. You know, more than ever, we're starting to question, you know, what does access mean? Do we have to be in person to do things? Are there other ways to solve problems? And we're becoming more creative than ever in trying to troubleshoot things. And that's great. I think universal design is a philosophical model that argues if we try to make things accessible for everyone from the beginning, there's no need for specialized accommodations and for people to stick out in needs to request accommodations for disabilities because things are already implemented. I think the universal design approach is going to become even more in the forefront going forward because of this. It's forcing us to think out of the box and addressing accessibility issues.
Yeah, and I may be off the point, but one example, you know, if you go to a restaurant, fast food restaurant, now you could only order through the drive-thru. But now more and more people at the restaurants are providing an app, which means you can order from your phone and pick up the food. That is a benefit for us in the deaf community because we can't walk in and order food through a drive-thru.
Right.
So just like Michael said, it does benefit with technology, like, coming up with more inventive ideas or people, you know, helping with people with disabilities. So now back on point. So in a classroom setting, now I'm teaching online. So we've come up with new ideas for that. And will it work or make it possible? It seems that everything has been going well so far. So that can benefit anyone who's hearing or anyone, maybe. Let's say in the spring, if we go back to normal in a classroom setting, I will still add things as an online, I will still add online classes to the program because some students seem to like it, so we can provide an opportunity for those students.
So it is changing.
I also want to add one thing. right now people are feeling isolated. People that have disabilities may be feeling like their experiences are, I don't know. I just hope in the future that more services will be provided, that there will be more support. I'm just hoping that it's just not swept under the rug and it just goes on. We do need to fight for it.
I would not disagree. And I guess that goes back to Michael's idea of universal design. If you design for, Michael had us watch a video, but if you design for quote unquote people at the margins, right, then we don't have any margins and everybody's included. UNESCO, the UN has done some outreach, and there's an organization called Inclusion Europe, and their two best recommendations are information should be accessible, it should be easy to understand, and it should be in Braille, it should be with a signer, it should be captioned, so that information that's out there should be in all possible formats always. And so I think that goes along with what you were both saying. I guess, I have lots more questions, but people probably have limited patience and time, but I do want to know if you guys think there are any things we can do and what you would like us to know about people with disabilities and deaf people during COVID. What should we walk out of this conversation from you guys knowing that will make us better interactors with people with disabilities and people who are deaf?
Well, if you meet a deaf person, you know a different language. So ASL is different from English. So I guess I would say try to write something down back and forth or gesture. Maybe pull your mask down to make sure that, of course, making sure that you're 6 feet apart.
Right.
But working with the deaf person for the interaction, for a communication. That's my suggestion.
Okay. Thanks.
I think periodic wellness checks, and going back to that universal design model, not just for people with disabilities, but anyone who may be in a vulnerable situation for whatever reason, checking on them on a regular basis, even if it's just a phone call for 5 minutes. It shows that you care, it shows that you're concerned, and it establishes a connection. That's the biggest thing. I think a lot of people are feeling disconnected during this difficult time. And those small things that we can do can make a big difference, especially for those of us, maybe we have families or we have more of people around us. There are some people who don't. They do feel more disconnected than ever. So doing small things like that can really make a big difference. I think we also want to underscore how valuable the contributions that people with disabilities are making to things right now. I have so many students who are working in grocery stores, working in hospitals, doing roles that are critical to keep us running. And we owe them a lot of gratitude. I'm very grateful to the people who are brave to go into their jobs every day. So even more than ever, show our appreciation because their contributions are what keeping us as a society running right now.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with Michael. Yep.
Great. Any final thoughts, y'all?
No, Michael said it perfectly.
Yeah, Michael's always good. Yes.
I just think it's wonderful that we're having these conversations, and Julia, I think it's wonderful you're facilitating this and other ones that you've done too. Again, this is a way that we keep people connected. Anything that shows that we care, I think, is so important. I think there's so much anxiety and depression and isolation right now. Anyone who's watching this, if you can think of ways that you can make your students feel connected, your community members feel connected, do it. We need one another as a society more than ever. And so hats off to you, Julia, for doing this. And thank you to our interpreter for facilitating this. And yeah, it's great to see all of you.
You too, Michael. And thanks, Tammy. Thanks, Adam. right, we will say goodbye.